Καλησπέρα, καλώς ήρθατε. Οι περισσότεροι με γνωρίζετε, είμαι ο Παδόπουλος και μαζί με τον Αναστάσιο Δασταρίτη είμαστε οι διοργανωτές του Thessaloniki Comic Convention. Ως οι κορεσπόντες της διοργάνωσης, θα ήθελα να καλωσορίσω και να ευχαριστήσω την Περιφέρεια Κεντρικής Μακεδονίας και το Film Office, τον κύριο Απόστολο Τσικώστα, τον Αντιπεριφερειάρχη Τουρισμού, τον κύριο Αλέξανδρο Προωθάνου και τους ανθρώπους του Film Office με τους οποίους εργαστήκαμε επί αρκετό καιρό ώστε να μπορέσουμε να πραγματοποιήσουμε το Masterclass με τον πολύ αγαπημένο μας φίλο, τον William Simpson. Δεν θα σας κουράσω, ευχαριστώ πάρα πολύ την Περιφέρεια Κεντρικής Μακεδονίας, το Film Office και κυρίως τον άνθρωπό μας, ο οποίος θα μεταλαμπαδεύσει λίγη από τη γνώση του. Είναι πάρα πολύ, δύο βραβεία Emmy αποδεικνύουν ότι κάνει πάρα πολύ καλή και σοβαρή δουλειά και σας αφήνω να τον απολαύσετε γιατί είναι πραγματικά απόλαυση.
Καλησπέρα και από μένα. Σας καλωσορίζω και εγώ στην εκδήλωσή μας. Είμαι η Emmy Awarded, υπεύθυνη του Film Office της Περιφέρειας Κεντρικής Μακεδονίας. Εκ μέρους του Περιφερειάρχη Κεντρικής Μακεδονίας, Απόστολου Κώστα, που πιστεύει πάρα πολύ σε αυτές τις συνέργειες, θα ήθελα να σας καλωσορίσω και να σας ευχαριστήσω για την παρουσία σας εδώ σήμερα σε ένα συναρπαστικό Masterclass. Δύο βραβεία Emmy λένε πολλά. Δεν θα πω τίποτα άλλο. Θα ήθελα να μιλήσω λίγο στα αγγλικά για να μην είναι όσοι αμήχανα και ο καλεσμένος μας. I would like to warmly welcome you on behalf of the Film Office-Central Macedonia here in Thessaloniki. I know that it's not your first time that you're here in Thessaloniki, so you're a bit aware of the city and the...
Yeah, it's never quite like this though.
Oh, yeah. It can be though. So, the Film Office probably supports such initiatives, so it's a great pleasure to have you here and to speak about the art of storyboard, which is essential for all film professionals, whether involved in video gaming, whether involved in animation or any other aspect of the audiovisual culture. I won't bother you with any details. The floor is yours. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. All righty. Hello. You know, one of the first things that I always kind of get asked is basically, how do I get your job? Which is, you know, it's the worst thing for me to hear because it's like there's too many people wanting to become storyboard artists. We need to keep them all away.
In order for them to stay happy?
No, in order for me to stay happy. Happy. That's it. Okay. I do actually wonder, like I said, why would anyone in the right mind want to become a storyboard artist? I mean, seriously, it's not the sexy end of filmmaking. It's not the thing that, you know, anybody actually knows that much about. There's a whole bunch of guys in a back room somewhere drawing stuff for directors, and the only people that get any kind of kudos are the directors. That's it. We can make it good or we can make it bad, and in the end, it doesn't matter. I mean, it does matter, but it doesn't matter for us. Our existence is something that's usually quite quiet. I've become very outspoken just because I ended up doing a lot of stuff on Game of Thrones, and it's kind of opened up my world into a whole other thing. I seem to be like some kind of traveling diplomat. I get to go around the world and talk about stuff that I did. How many years ago now? It's like 10 years ago? 12 years ago.
We met you before the Comicon.
Yeah.
Your first appearance here was during our first Comicon at 2015.
It's a while ago. And the thing is, you know, if you want to be a storyboard artist and you want to spend all your life working really, really hard, long hours, all the demands of a filmmaking laid upon you. Yes, it's the work for you where you don't mind about having a social life or anything else. It becomes a thing that if you're good at storyboarding, you just want to make the best film ever on paper. Well, obviously not on computer screens for lots of people. I'm still old school, I still draw on paper, and it feels these days like I'm a caveman, but that's okay, I can still do it. They all end up on the computer in the end anyway.
Before you continue, most of us, like in the Comic audience, were acquainted to William Simpson's work throughout his work in various DC comics like Hellblazer, so his style was already iconic before he broke through to the world of concept art.
The thing with my stuff, I think, is because I did comic strips, in a way, I was always making films, except I was making them for comic books, because my style of artwork was a more realistic style, and for me, even my influences were all film. You know, I grew up watching lots and lots of movies. I mean, I would sit and draw while I was watching movies, and the thing is that they've always influenced the work that I did, even though I was never quite aware of how much they actually did. And filmmaking was an illusion, it was something way out there somewhere. You know, but people ask me about, you know, how do I become a storyboard artist? And I can only answer from my own experience, which is, well, do 25 years of comic strips, and then, you know, you may become a storyboard artist. I mean, that is not the case for everybody, because there's loads and loads of courses for storyboarding. But the thing is, understanding storytelling is something that I only learned about through doing comic strips, even though they were influenced by films. So in a way, I probably learned my storytelling from watching movies, but then transferred it into doing comic strips, plus getting all of the benefits of all of the great comic strip artists whose work I loved anyway. And suddenly, the idea of stepping into storyboarding was not so far-fetched, but it did happen for me because it was an accident. You know, I happened to be walking down a street in London, and I had finished a comic job, and I was kind of in between things. And a friend came to me and said, "Hey, would you fancy storyboarding our low budget movie where there's not a lot of money, but it's a film anyway?" And I said, "Hey, that could be good. How hard can it be? It's just like a comic strip." And as it turned out, it was just like a comic strip, which shows you how little I knew then anyway. But no, it was just like a comic strip. And the thing is that it's all about, you know, the minute you start drawing something like this, you're trying to make that film come alive on paper. You're wanting everything that you're going to see on the screen to be on paper. And that's basically all I've ever done. It's been years now of drawing movies on paper and actually thinking, this is fantastic. The only bit that I dislike is when the pressure piles on and suddenly, you know, you're losing days where you don't get a lot of sleep because you're actually having to turn out storyboards. And I don't care what they say about your working day being between the hour of 8 and 7. A lot of the time it becomes between the hour of 8 and 10. And it just keeps on going like that. Right, I better press a button and see what we've actually got on this, because it's been a while since I've looked at this, alright? And yeah, who's got the biggest ego? Is it the director? Is it the producer? Is it the storyboard artist who's making the film? You know, who the hell knows? Anyway, this is right. How it all begins. You see, these scribbles are thumbnails, and there's no difference really between the thumbnails I used to do for comic strips and what I ended up doing for films. And it's like if you can get the notes done, if you can get the information done like this, you've already got your storyboard, and then it becomes then it becomes a process of how well can we draw it? You know, are you good? Can you make it look real on paper so that everybody can understand what it is that you've actually drawn? And sometimes people would just use my roughs, which is very disappointing for me because it means I'm not going to get paid to do the rest of it, to actually sit down and draw a lot of stuff.
You mean you deliver the roughs just to have a bigger picture, a clearer picture, and they're like, okay, it's fine, we'll go with that.
Sometimes I sit with a director and I make my little rough notes. And the great thing is I make them really rough. So they let me go away and spend a couple of days drawing them. Yeah. No, you gotta know, you know, the job has got to be, you gotta, you know, make some money out of this and live a life of total bliss. Anyway, it doesn't always happen that way. The thing is, I do think that people that want to be a storyboard artist, I think you should actually want to be an artist first, where you learn drawing. I mean, nowadays we've got programs to actually basically draw the figures for you. We've got figures already on a computer screen. We can piece the figures together. We can get our shots by using computer imagery to basically do it. And the only problem with that is there's so little in the stuff. I mean, the storyboard artists that I know have all been guys who've been drawing for years and they draw incredibly well. And I think it has to be. I don't think we can lose that. I mean, there's a basic format for doing boards on computer and using computer programs. But I think you also have to give life into it and energy and make people feel that it's a thrilling piece of work, or it's a horrific piece of work, or it's a comedic piece of work, whatever. The point is, I think we have to learn to draw first. I mean, and look, it took me years. I didn't walk into doing storyboarding. I walked into doing artwork. And I was always doing artwork. From when I was a child, I drew and drew and drew, and I kept on drawing, and I'm still doing it, and I'm still learning how to draw, because there's days when I sit down, like coming to a convention, sitting at a table, and I'm going, oh my God, what do I do today? And it's all practice. Everything is drawing practice. Anyway, that's just my thing that I have to hold on to, I guess, because it's the only way I'll keep drawing. Right, so we've all seen the thumbnails, okay? This is where it all begins. I remember getting on a coach. I'd flown into Berlin. I was going in to replace another storyboard artist who got fired. I went and said to the line producer, when do I meet the director? And he said, no, you're getting on the coach with the director, and you're going to go off and do the recce with the director. And I thought, okay, instant, off the plane, onto a coach. Sat down, I got onto the coach, sat down beside this guy, and I saw him look at me incredibly strangely, thinking, who the hell is this? And I said, I'm your new storyboard artist, where do you want to begin? And he said, at the beginning. So I thought I was going to come in and just take over from somebody else, but it wasn't like that. You know, there wasn't a lot of stuff done. This was start.
Which film can you disclose to us which film was that?
It was called Unknown.
Unknown.
It's a movie with Liam Neeson.
Okay,
it's sort of a spy type assassin thing. Anyway, so I sit down and I get the script, and it's kind of normally what I do. Normally I will have read a script, although this time, I have read the script, but I'm handed a script. And I start making notes at the side of the script, just like this stuff. Whenever the director starts talking to me, I'm trying to dig into his brain and find out what the hell's going on inside his brain. Is this a clear brain, or is there something else going on? I don't know. Anyway, it depends what the director's taking that morning.
Who knows what it is? Anyway, the guy was great. He starts looking at what I'm doing, and he goes to me, "You're very fast." And I'm thinking, but these are only thumbnails. This is just roughs. And I said, these are just roughs. And he goes, no, you're very fast. And I'm thinking, I'm not fast. This is very weird. Anyway, and then I'm wondering, what was the previous guy like? Because if I'm fast, the other guy must have been dreadfully slow. Anyway, so I keep making my notes. I go off on this recce. We're seeing around bits of Berlin that nobody ever gets to see, because that's one of the great things about making movies, is that when you go off on location trips, you're actually still scouting in a way, and you're finding things that other people have been unaware of. And again, it's because you look. So I was going in to talk to the director. He would bring me up first. He would start telling me, he wants me to do this, he wants me to do this, he wants me to do this. And I would be noting all these notes down, all my little scribbles on the side of the script. And then I would have maybe half an hour to wander about by myself, because then all the other parts of the crew come in to get their instructions from the director. So I spent a lot of time just taking photographs of Berlin, and it was fantastic. Anyway, that's got nothing to do with storyboarding, it's just what I did. Anyway, the thing was, I was asked, well, when will you have these ready? I said, Wednesday. This was Monday, Wednesday. And he said, that's fine. And of course, on Tuesday, I get a phone call from the assistant saying to me, can you come up and show the director what you've been doing? And I'm going, you do know I've only started, and it'll be tomorrow before it's done. And he said, yes, but please come up and show. So I arrive upstairs with my photocopies of 3 pages. That was all I'd done. And the director starts looking at the drawings, and he goes to me, you really can draw? And I said, yes, I can. And he said, no problem. I'll see you tomorrow. And that's basically what happened. I did the work. I was only meant to be in Berlin for a week. And then they told me, no, you're coming back for another 3 weeks. And so I ended up having a month on Unknown, and it was fantastic. But the thing was, I don't think it would have happened if I couldn't draw. You know, this is the point. We should always be challenging ourselves to do better, to draw better. The crazy thing was, if I go back in the career, what I do on film isn't always storyboarding. And that's the other thing. You know, a lot of people want to be one specific thing, you know, to be a storyboard artist. I'm not that person, because storyboarding for me is a means to an end. It's something where I was an artist first that happened to do storyboarding, like I was an artist first that happened to draw comic strips. Now, the thing is, I go off and paint as well. I mean, in between jobs, I'm doing paintings. I've had exhibitions of stuff. You know, to me, it's artwork. It's all artwork. You know, it's not about you only have one skill. And I will emphasize this lots through this, because the point is, any of you who are wanting to be just a storyboard artist, you're limiting yourselves. You know, the idea is be an artist, be somebody who draws incredibly well, be somebody who can really tell a story. It's the other thing of, you know, if you want to be in movies, I do think you should watch movies as well. You know, the idea is we must immerse ourselves in all of this stuff. And as I said, I've been watching movies since I was a tiny child. And the thing is that it was, you know, westerns and film noir and war movies and all sorts of strange romance movies that were made back in the day, classic movies about Charles Dickens books, Shakespeare. All of that stuff is in here somewhere. I mean, I've got so much stuff in my head that I can't access it properly. You know, it's like the files are all really messed up, but it is all there waiting to kind of be picked on at some point in my life. If we want to do this, we need to know imagery. We need to know how these things work together. So it's interesting because, you know, it's also that thing about what part of a movie or what part of a program do you actually storyboard? Because again, people have this idea that you only do these action scenes. But that's not the case. What if you're working on a movie that isn't action? You know, there's lots of other things one does. And so much of it is interesting camera moves where you have to imagine what that camera is seeing at any moment. So if it's a flying camera that's going to look down and come in and around the audience, you've got to be able to see all that. You've got to be able to draw all that and make it into something that works. That might lead me to another one. Oh yes, okay, Closing the Ring. Closing the Ring is Richard Attenborough's last movie that he ever did. Sir Richard, or Lord Richard Attenborough, that's it. Look, I was talking about flying cameras, so here a second. If you look at this is all one complete sequence where we start looking at a flag on top of a tower, and then we come down the tower, and we come down to the front door where we can see inside that there's a load of people, and we move inside and go along the side of some of the people and then get in close to one of the characters, and then we reveal this character. Now, I mean, there's a million ways to draw this, but there's only one way that made sense on that day to draw this, and it was because of what way the camera was going to move. Camera was going to move, and the camera was going to move in. And again, this is us. This is what we have to know. We've got to know how a camera moves, and we've got to know what we're going to see. And it's all, as we read a script, we're seeing all of this. This is embedded in our heads, and we're seeing, for me, it's almost like seeing a film strip in your mind, and that film strip is winding through, so you're picking certain bits to draw, to show the information, to put the message across. Now, also, there's no exact science in storyboarding. There's lots of things that artists know, and there's lots of things that they will write beside a storyboard frame. This is really old for me. This is when I basically drew pictures like a flipping comic strip and added in things. And the thing about Closing the Ring was, Richard Attenborough said to me, "William, can you draw the movie?" And basically I said, "Yes, I can draw the movie. And where will we start?" And he said, "Oh, we'll start at the beginning, and you just draw it and then show me stuff." And I'm thinking,
before he gave you any direction regarding camera work, stuff like that?
I got no direction.
So you made the movie?
No, I didn't. No, I didn't. But what I'm trying to say is, Richard was wonderful at allowing you to do things, and he would also be working out stuff with his AD, and then he would see the drawings, and they would give him an idea for things, and then he would use what he needed. So it's a certain process. Now, there's other directors who knew exactly what they wanted and didn't need all of this stuff drawn. They just needed things drawn that they needed. And the rest of it, they already knew what they were going to shoot. That'll come to TV stuff, really. A lot of the time, there's been quite a few films that I've kind of drawn from the beginning to the end, or I've done about 3/4 of the movie. I did a film later on called Halo, which was a live-action version of the game.
There was a film or a TV show about that?
There was a film.
A film? Halo?
There was a film of Halo. And nobody's seen it. Anyway, the point was, I've done lots of things that nobody's seen. Anyway, the thing about Halo was, again, it was a situation where I drew 3/4 of that film. I got a friend in to draw the other quarter, and basically the whole movie was storyboarded from beginning to end. Now, the director knew what he wanted, but it still was storyboarded from beginning to end. And as was said earlier about the whole thing of storyboarding being the start of movies, and also how you said something about how it's all worked out. It's true. It's true. You know, there's a lot of filmmakers, the auteur directors, who feel that they don't need storyboards, they don't need drawings of any kind because it's all there in their heads. Now, I've worked with a really classic director who knows everything that's in his head, but he needed storyboards as well, even though, we'll get to that. I'll come back to that, hold on, because it'll be here in a minute. Anyway, what have I got here? Sorry. This is more of Closing the Ring, which was my, let me see, it was one of my earliest films. I'd worked, let me see. Shit, when was Closing? I should have my CV.
Can you not use
swear
swear
words,
please?
What?
Can you not use
Sorry,
swear words?
sorry. Delete. Okay. Closing the Ring was a movie where I was learning how to storyboard. The basic thing is it's all one frame size, which is different from comics. It makes life a lot easier because you know that everything you need to do fits within a frame size. On this one, you can see that I've drawn wider frames, and the reason why is our camera is going to move and show us more. So the point was, Richard really liked this, so it was kind of cool. I drew stuff. He liked the fact that I'd extended frames. He could see what everything was doing. And and that was superb. I just kept turning out these drawings. And the whole point was they were describing bits of the action. But for me, it was like having a comic strip script where you're inventing everything and you're picking all the shots and you're trying to choose what you think is more important than other things. So with this, every line had something interesting in it that made me think, oh God, I've got to draw that. I've got to cover all this so that when he decides to direct it, he can cut out whatever he needs. So I was doing, in a way, extra drawing because I was given a freer hand on the piece of work. But it was great because, I didn't care. I loved just turning out these drawings. And there was a lot of action stuff in it, so it covered a lot of ground. Okay, going back to the thing about auteur directors and what you end up doing with them. I had already drawn a bunch of movies by the time I worked with Neil Jordan, and on Breakfast on Pluto, I got a whole lot of scenes, lots and lots and lots of very interesting scenes to draw. But this started with a storyboard artist had gone into work on Breakfast on Pluto. I got a phone call asking me, would I come to Dublin and would I be interested in working on a movie with Neil Jordan? I said, oh, absolutely, that would be cool. Can I see the script? And so my friend said, yes, we'll send you the script. So on the Saturday morning, I had the script. I went to my favorite coffee shop in Belfast. I sat down, I started reading the script. And it was a 1.5 hour script. So I read it in about 2 hours, finding myself looking back occasionally. But the fact was, the script was so good that all you did was turn the pages. It was so well written. Now, I've worked on other scripts where it has taken much longer to read. In fact, at the time I was doing this one, I had another script to read, and where the Neil Jordan script I read over 2 hours. The other script I had, which was also 1.5 hours long, it took me 3 days to read, just because it was so heavily written that you found yourself losing track of things and having to go back. With Neil Jordan's script, it was perfect. And so the thing was, I'd read the script. On the Monday morning, I went down to meet Neil Jordan in Dublin, and I arrived down there at 8 o'clock in the morning. Neil wasn't there. He wasn't coming in until 10. So I asked the guys, what scenes are going to be looked at today? And they told me a couple of scenes. So I said, can I sit down and actually make a start on these? Can I try and work them out? And the guys thought, yes, of course. So I sit down. Neil Jordan comes in, and you see, I found out only that day that they'd fired the guy that was there before because he hadn't read the script, he didn't come in with any tools to do anything on the script, and he made a joke at the director's expense. Director hated him. That was him gone. He was gone. So there's a certain amount of diplomacy and what can I say, polite behavior that one must have as a storyboard artist, as probably as a human being, but the point is, as a storyboard artist, it's really important. Anyway, I end up meeting Neil at 10, and he looks at me like, okay, who's this guy? And he said, this is Will, your new storyboard artist. And he still looked at me with suspicion. And I said to him, I'd read the script at the weekend, it's brilliant. I said, I sat down today because I understand you're meant to be working on certain scenes. And I said, I've made a start on them. And he said, really? And I said, yes. And he said, come into this room. So he takes me into this little side room beside the art department. And he said, show me what you've done. So I started showing him the boards, which aren't too different from these boards that we have here. Let me just check a second. Yeah, all of these. Anyway, and he said, can we put the two birds in there? Can we do this? Can we do that? And I said, sure. And he said, excellent. He said, when do you think you'll have those for me? And again, like the other job later, I said, Wednesday, if that's okay. And he said, sure. He said, give me a ring when you've got them done. And he said, you see this room? This is your room. Don't go and talk to those people. This is your room. You stay here. And so I had just arrived. I got this room to work in. I put on my music and I sat down and I started drawing the storyboards. Now, I had them finished on the Tuesday round about lunchtime. And I went out to the art department and asked them, can I get in touch with Neil? He said to call him whenever I'd finished the stuff, and I'd finished the stuff. Do you think that's okay? And they said, okay, yes, you can phone Neil. But there was a certain element of fear rippling through the room, and I thought, what's wrong with these people? So I rang Neil, and I said, can I come over and show you these? And he said, oh yes, excellent. We're out at lunch. Come over for lunch. So I go over to this place, and most of the crew are down at this end of the table, and Neil's sitting at this end of the table with his DP, and he says, come up here. And so we start looking through the boards, and the two of them are so happy with them. And then they said, you haven't had lunch. Feed the man, get him lunch. Excellent. So there I was, and I felt in this honored position of having done a decent job and getting lunch. So that was cool. That was all cool, because everybody else was still down there. And it's a really weird thing. You know, there is no reason why we are all meant to be afraid of directors or afraid of producers. It is a job. And the point is, if we're good at the job, we have nothing to fear. And so you end up, egos get in the way all the time. And I mean, I've worked with egos before. And the point is, we don't have to let them become an overpowering thing that makes us not be good at our job or makes us concerned about our job. If we can read a story and if we can split that story up, we are fine. I'm just going to go back a second here. Yeah, okay. Now, this is another part of this story that makes you realize the position of a storyboard artist and what level of ultimate respect you have in the creation of a film. So, there was a preview showing of Breakfast on Pluto in Belfast, and there was a talk that was going to be done by Neil Jordan. So, it turns out my friend Kevin Jackson of the BBC, who has been here to Thessaloniki for the film festival, Kevin was giving the talk with Neil. So here was this audience of people, lots of us connected with the film. And during the talk, Kevin asked Neil Jordan about storyboarding. And he says, I never use it. And this is the auteur approach. I never use it. And I'm sitting in the audience feeling like, okay, the carpet has just been pulled out from underneath my feet. I have no existence whatsoever in the making of a film. And I kind of felt a little bit oh my God, I'm sinking into my chair. And then Kevin, who I know very well, said to Neil, yeah, but wait a minute, didn't you use our storyboard artist from up here, William Simpson, on your film? And Neil goes, oh, wait a minute, I did, didn't I? And Kevin says, well, yes, and he's in the audience. And I went, hi, Neil. And so
He forgot.
the point was, it is, as I say, convenient Alzheimer's. I mean, the fact is that it's very interesting what can be forgotten about your existence when it comes to a movie. So be prepared. If you all become storyboard artists, or if there's directors in this midst of people, directors, treat your storyboard artists well. Storyboard artists, remember who you are and what your position is in the making of a film. It's important. We all need to know where we are. It is fascinating what can be forgotten. Okay, you've all seen this, so I'm going to move on. What is that? Oh, that's more of Breakfast on Pluto. Yeah, you don't need to see all of this. Okay, well, these are nice storyboards, so you can look at those for a minute. Anyway, the point is, you know, there is something so remarkable about being the first person who deals with a director when it comes to the making of the film. Okay, you've dealt with producers. You know, the director deals with the producers. The producers know what the film's kind of meant to be, but they have no certainty of what the film's going to be because it's all in the director's head. And sometimes the director doesn't have it all in their head at that moment in time. But when you sit down as a storyboard artist to talk to a director, suddenly the information has been explained to you. And you also have to be a psychologist of some sort. You have got to delve into the mind of the director. And you've got to kind of see what way they're thinking. Now, if you've seen other movies that a director has made, you have an idea of certain approaches that they will take. And that's always really good because usually it's going to be different in the movie you're working on with them, but there will be certain attitudes that will come up because of the fact that it is the same director. And again, if you know their work, you know what they'll do. Neil Jordan, his work is always quite diverse. I'd seen lots of Neil Jordan movies before I ever worked with him, but it was still this remarkable process of being prepared that you were going to get something that was going to be different, and it was different. Anyway, so apart from him forgetting that I actually existed on the movie, that's a notch. There was also the fact that all through the process, he didn't know my name, which is also interesting, because he was very grateful at the end when we were talking and I was leaving, and he said, we must work again sometime. And I said, that would be excellent. I'd enjoy that. But he still didn't remember who I was when I left. And that's okay. That's okay. I'd done my job. I'd fulfilled my position. It was fine. You know, why have an ego about something when, you know, it's not important to have one? And it isn't important. Get rid of egos. Egos have got to go. Anyway, the thing is, what was nice about it was a couple of years later, I got another call about going to work on another Neil Jordan film, which was Undine, which was with Colin Farrell. And it was a beautiful little story. And when I went to work on that one, it's like a kind of a fairy tale that isn't, but it's actually a really nice little movie. Neil knew exactly who I was, but I was Bob. So the point was, he knew he'd worked with me, but he didn't know my name. And I just accepted. He's going to keep calling me Bob. That's all right. I'll take Bob. Bob's good. It gives me an identity. It's okay. So the thing was, I worked with him on Undine, and again, at the end of it, it was, this really good moment because I'd achieved what I needed to for him. He was really, really happy with it, and he said, that's fantastic. We will work again. And I thought, okay. As I went off on a long, long drive up the coast of Ireland because I'd never done it before, so I decided to do it that day. Anyway, the third job, now, in between all of these, I've been working on lots of other films. I'd done lots of stuff. I'd done some TV stuff and so on. But the third movie I get to do is a film called Byzantium. And by the time I did Byzantium, Neil had asked for me by name. He knew exactly who I was. And at the end of the movie, he said, I'd love you to come and work on Borges. And the problem was it was going to be at the same time as Game of Thrones, so I couldn't do it. Anyway, okay, where are we getting to? Ah, yes. The other thing about, it's like any job in film, you don't know where you're going to end up. And I think it's one of the greatest things about doing film work is that you're never going to stay in one place. You're going to be somewhere else. And I once got a job that was, it was a Syrian director. Half the crew were Moroccan, Lebanese, Libyan, and the other half of the crew were Italian, the Rossellini company, and there was 3 Irish guys right in the middle of all this. We were like this little pivot point, and it was me and the cameraman and one of the production designers. This was a crazy film that I spent a couple of weeks in London in a luxury hotel working with the Syrian director on what he was wanting for his project. And again, that was another thing where you're getting to understand what way a person's mind thinks, and you then produce artwork on the basis of that. You start to know the mind. And I think, in a way, it's probably one of the things that you need to do most is no matter what your drawing skill is, but as I say, you must be a really good drawer. But the thing is, no matter what your skill is, you've got to be good at listening to a person's ideas. You've got to be able to be very quiet and calm and listen to their ideas, also being able to see things that they maybe haven't seen and come up with these ideas and offer them. Because the point is, you will know which ones are yours when you see it on screen. Nobody else will ever know, but you will know. And I guess that's one of the only things that makes it, it's kind of a really good thing. Because sometimes these things are acknowledged by directors and told to other directors and so on, and people then rehire you. But the point is, that's the only satisfaction you'll probably get, other than doing a good job. You'll get the satisfaction of knowing when your work is on screen and you have been the director for that moment. And it could be just a moment. And I will tell you about moments later as well. Anyway, the thing is, this turned out to be a movie that was not a movie. It started off as a movie. We did 20 minutes on these 3 Italian islands. And this was one where I have to say, the fact that you get taken all over the world is true, but when you're sitting on an Italian island and your director has gone off on a recce, has asked you to finish a particular scene for when he gets back, and you're going, no problem, and you're sitting under a lovely little canopy, and you've got your bottle of beer, and you're working around the table, then you realize the film industry is very different from what I thought it would be, and life is strange, and I love this. Because here I am out in the middle of the Adriatic enjoying myself. And I drew my stuff. By the time he came back, Najat comes back, I had done the piece of work and he was very happy with it. So they shot 20 minutes of this movie. And this movie was then shown to the backer of the movie, which turned out to be Colonel Gaddafi. And he was putting the money into financing this film. And the film, as it turned out as well, was being used to show the Italian Prime Minister at the time. Is it Prime Minister or President? Prime Minister? Anyway, Berlusconi, who basically, Gaddafi said to Berlusconi, you actually owe us reparation for the damage you did to Libya, the Italians did to Libya, at during the years leading up to the Second World War, and the amount of people that they'd killed. And Berlusconi goes, okay, I'll give you the money, just don't make the film. So the film was never made. And it lost me the chance of meeting Sean Connery and Monica Bellucci. And to this day, I'm so disgusted with this. I really thought I was going to have fun drawing those characters. Anyway, didn't happen. But a very interesting film nonetheless. Now, what else have we got here? Oh, yes, okay. Oh, this is my third Neil Jordan movie. And I have no idea why I called it this. The point is, this one was set on islands off the coast of Ireland. It was a very, very interesting take on vampires. Again, it was Neil doing his thing. You will never. That's the other thing. You don't know what it is you're going to end up drawing on anything. This is another reason why you have to be super adaptable as an artist. The point is, I've worked on horror movies, I've worked on sci-fi movies, I've worked on thrillers, and I've worked on just ordinary romantic dramas. And the thing is, that means that you go from drawing ordinary people with ordinary cars to drawing futuristic people with futuristic cars to drawing strange, evil, bloodthirsty vampire people and lots of gore. You know, you have to be capable of indulging yourself in all these things and being able to draw them. And it's another reason why the job's so interesting, because you get to do all this stuff. You get to challenge yourself. You know, one of the beautiful things about the Game of Thrones work that I ended up doing was, you know, I had loved Conan as a character from when I was a kid. I'd read Conan comics. I read the Robert E. Howard books. And it was always something that I never got to do. I never got to do any Conan stuff. But when I got to do Game of Thrones, it was like I'd stepped into a world that was not dissimilar from Conan. It had big cities, it had lots of slashing blades and decapitations and, you know, horses and all of this wonderful stuff. And it was like I was in heaven.
Decapitations, wonderful stuff.
What?
Decapitations and wonderful stuff.
Well, they are. I mean, come on, if you draw them, they're
As
great.
a storyboard artist.
You imagine, whack, the head's flying, your camera's going with it, there's blood coming out of it. It's great. It's wonderful stuff. Anyway, I mean, I had to decapitate somebody with a cheese wire once in Byzantium, you know. So I mean, it's all interesting. I mean, because your mind then gets into, well, how does this actually work? And you don't usually find somebody to test it out on. You know, you actually just.
I hope
you
so.
Just kind of. You make it up, but that's again, yeah, imagination is really important. Anyway, so the thing is, yes, what was this? We get to draw everything. It's the brilliance of doing storyboarding. You know, it's the fact that you're making it, that it's going to be on screen. That's another thing. You never. Your work is never finished until you see the film, until you see the TV program. The minute you start to see the moving pictures and they make sense and you realize, oh heck, I drew that and it actually looks like what I drew, then you realize you're having an effect, you're having an influence, and that is highly important when it comes to storyboarding. With Game of Thrones, the very first bit that we saw, there was a 20-minute segment that was shown way before the actual series came out. And a friend of mine, Colm Hackett, who does editing and teaching moving image arts, which is a course now in Ireland and in England and, you know, all over the UK. It's a brilliant course for training young people into the film business. Now, Colm and I sat watching the 20-minute segment, and at that stage, I had my book that I'd compiled of all the storyboards that I'd drawn for season one. And Colm is looking at those first bunch of pages, which are the sequence that's shown on TV. So we're seeing the guy riding through the snow. We're seeing him come across the encampment where there's frozen dead bodies. We're then seeing him go to get the other guys who then come along and there's no bodies there. And then we get to see a sword in the snow and he's pulling out the sword and suddenly there's a shadow over him and a nice blade just comes and whacks his head and it's the White Walkers. And that whole sequence, Colm's looking at it going, oh my God, this is shot for shot. And it was shot for shot. And that's because the director knew exactly what he wanted, and I drew exactly what the director wanted. So when they filmed it, it was exactly the same sequence. Now, there's lots of directors I've worked for where you don't know what's going to be shown. You have no idea, because they sometimes get you to draw stuff that they haven't talked to you about. They basically just said, do it. And you come up with the stuff and they pick what they need. And that's it. It's an interesting way of making movies, but I tend to feel that there's more of a purpose for each of the steps. One of the other things that one has to remember about storyboarding is, okay, there is you, the storyboard artist, and there is the director. And you talk over sequences, and those sequences are then shown to the producers, who then look at it and go, that's too expensive, that's too expensive, that's too expensive, cut them out. So then the director will come back to you, and the director will talk to you about the next version of what the storyboard will be, and you sit and you go through the next version, and again it's shown to the producers, and the producers go, nope, it's still a bit too expensive, can you change that? And they come back and they change it. Now the thing is, that means you have just saved the production a vast sum of money, and the only payment that's going out is to the director who's working on it and you. They don't need to be paying the crew to be lined up. They don't need the cameraman there. They don't need all of the makeup department. They don't need the costume department. You don't need anybody. There's just you and the director. And you are solving so many issues that are going to pop up in the film, which is why I also think that when we talk about making low-budget movies, where one of the first jobs that gets thrown out is the storyboard artist's job, because they think we don't need a storyboard artist because we can solve all these problems just by doing the shot list and that's it. But the point is, if they bothered to hold on to the storyboard artist and actually get the difficult parts of a film worked out in advance on a low-budget movie, I think it would save the low-budget movie a lot of money that they can then put into other parts of the film. I think it's probably more essential even to work on a low-budget movie. As I say, most low-budget filmmakers don't think that's the case. I do think it's the case. Big-budget movies, they have so much money to spend, they can change their minds on everything. I worked on a movie, my first ever big, giant movie was a movie called Reign of Fire, which was Matthew McConaughey and Christian Bale, and it was this huge film that was financed, I think, by Disney, but it was through a company called Spyglass, and that was in Dublin. And I have to say how things have actually changed in the industry, because the parties that they had at the weekends, any of us could have made a movie for the money they were spending on the parties. It was huge. There was so much money. They changed things. They could rebuild sets that got washed away by Irish weather. They could do that, and that was all cool. And it still didn't seem to matter. The money just kept on coming into the film. So I have then worked on movies where every penny has counted. And you have a limited lifespan on the movie. You have to produce as much work as you can produce, as quickly as you can produce it. And you're going to be off the film whenever you've fulfilled fulfilled the money they're going to pay you. One of the first movies I worked on, I did 2.5 weeks of storyboarding on this little movie, and then they didn't have any more money for the storyboards, and I also needed a job, so I said, "Have you got any other jobs going?" And they said, "We've got an assistant standby prop." And I said, "I'll do that. What do I have to do?" Anyway, so it meant that I was handing out shovels and rifles and all sorts of interesting things and moving carts for about 6 weeks. And it was brilliant because I made every mistake I could possibly make on a movie in that 6 weeks. I tripped over cables. I walked in front of camera. I got a job doing some wafting of smoke, which I smoked up a room, too much, too little, whatever. The point was that anything that could go wrong went wrong during that 6 weeks, and I learned so much out of it. I also learned the job that I wanted to do, which was basically the director's job, because the director was doing 25, 26 takes of almost every shot. And the problem with that was it was a low-budget movie. You can't afford to do 25, 26 takes. In fact, if they'd hired me to do the storyboards for longer, they probably would have saved a lot of money on not having to work out on the day what we're going to shoot. That's the other thing. It costs so much. The minute you've got a crew in front of you, it costs so much to shoot a scene. So, the more prepared you are to shoot a scene, the better. And that means if you've already got it worked out in a storyboard, you are prepared. And as long as your ego doesn't get in the way, that makes you, I guess I'm talking to the directors now really than anybody else. If the director has got that worked out, then go with it. You've got limited money. Do not fear what you've already worked out. It works. Shoot. And then if you've got time, shoot something else. But only if you've already captured what you've worked out. It's very simple. You know, and the reason I know this is because I've shot a couple of short films as a director and realized that I needed every moment, and I managed to get the stuff done in time. And that was because I liked what I'd worked out. It meant it was easy to do it on screen. And also, while you were shooting, you realize, oh, I don't need that shot. I don't need that shot. So I can take those out of the storyboards. I've already got them. This is great. So you were saving time. And that was me doing my own stuff. I was saving my own time. I think that's the same thing that happens with all big movies. Now, what else have we got here? Anything else interesting? Oh, this is a decapitation with a cheese wire. How good is that? Yeah.
Wonderful stuff.
This is amazing. Yeah, look, oh yes, decapitation, cheese wire. If anybody hasn't seen Byzantium, go and watch it. You'll get to see this scene. It's cool. Anyway, Gemma Arterton and Saoirse Ronan, absolutely brilliant. Fantastic film. Okay. Right, what else have we got? How are we doing for time?
We are like
10 minutes?
No.
Longer?
Half an hour, 30 minutes.
Oh, brilliant. Excellent.
Yes.
Okay. Right. Let's talk about this.
We'll have around 10 more minutes, 10 more minutes until we...
If anybody wants to ask me questions, please do, because the point is, I am just waffling here. It's good. This wonderful little bit of storyboarding, which is very nicely drawn. I'd actually learned something by this time. Suddenly, my drawings are better. It looks better. That's always good for me. It makes me happy. It's also done in the same time as the ones that don't look so good. Anyway, this was a film called Your Highness, where I worked with Danny McBride, James Franco, Natalie Portman, and the director was David Gordon Green. But my input mostly came from Danny McBride, which was interesting because he's an actor. As it turns out, he's more than an actor. He's an actor-writer. He's an actor-director. What was lovely about this film, and this again goes to my point earlier about being diverse in what you do, being an artist first, and then a storyboard artist. The idea that you can adapt to anything. When I was doing this is the second part of my time on this movie, because the first part of my time in this movie, I was doing conceptuals. I did so many conceptual pieces of artwork that never made it to screen. I mean, 90% of what I did never got near the screen. And this was basically because the guys would come along and they would ask me to come up with stuff. And I remember one particular day when Danny McBride comes to me and says, well, we want to do this thing with this giant snake monster. And we're going to all walk across the back of this monster. It's going to start wriggling, and we're all going to fall off it into the water, and it's going to be great. Can you draw that? And I said, yes, Danny, I can draw that. And so I sit down and get on with it. And the next day, Danny comes to me and goes, well, that's fantastic. We can't afford it. Let's do something else. So the point was, I was doing this for 2.5 months. I was drawing things that we would never see, but it was great. And this sequence of storyboarding was a storyboard sequence that you never saw as a live acted part of the movie, but you did see a version of it as an animation piece. And I don't know whether it was that the guys didn't have the money to do it as a live action bit, or whether they decided that animation was the way to go, or whether it was cheaper to do the animation thing. I have no idea. But the point was, this was a little sequence where Danny McBride has been a very naughty boy with a lot of the dwarf wives of the dwarfs. And they decide they're going to hang him for his terrible deeds. And of course, they build a scaffold and they hang him, but they've built a dwarf scaffold, so when he falls through, he's standing there with a rope around his neck and he's okay. And then he runs off down a field, and that is the opening, I think, of the movie, except it's in animation. I don't know, has anybody seen Your Highness? You don't remember?
I can't recall the animation part, but I've seen it, yeah.
Yeah, you have seen it, okay.
Yeah, the fantasy, comedy fantasy film.
Anyway, that's what this was, which was really nice. Now, what we've got here is
falling from there, we'll tell it.
This is the whole thing about the adaptability bit. When I started on Game of Thrones, which was actually, while I was doing Your Highness, I got asked about doing some extra work on a potential TV series. And I said, sure, what is it? And I was told, I can't tell you. This is my producer was saying. And I said, well, what's it about? And he said, medieval fantasy. And I said, well, that's just like what we're doing on this, except it wasn't quite like what we were doing on this. Anyway, so I had to meet a supervising art director and a production designer, the only two people in Belfast, and they could not tell me what the project was. So basically they asked me, this isn't that bit, they asked me to draw some castles, some knights in armor, some beheadings, and some giant wolves. And that was it. I didn't have any other information. I didn't know what it was.
Were you acquainted with the book, Song of Ice and Fire? Were you acquainted with that property before you worked on Game of Thrones?
God, no. No, I had no idea. I had no idea what the books were. I didn't know how famous they were in the world at all. I'd never seen them. Most of the kind of fantasy writers I'd read were much, much further back in time. Anyway, so the thing was, I did these drawings, and they in a way were like concept drawings that were handed over. They went off to America. I went back to my day job on the Crazy Your Highness. And it's about 3/4 in, Mark, the producer, comes to me and says, we've got Game of Thrones. And I said, is that what I was working on? And he said, yes. And I said, does this mean I have a job? And he said, absolutely. So as soon as I finished Your Highness, which was on a Wednesday, on a Thursday, I moved over to Game of Thrones. And basically, that's where I started from. I'd already drawn bits of Game of Thrones before I even got to work on Game of Thrones, before I even knew what it was. That I still put down to the fact that if I hadn't drawn years and years of comic books, I kind of wouldn't have adapted the way I did to doing what I had to do. Because, I mean, the reason that I ended up working on Your Highness was because I did costume designs before I knew we were getting the movie. And again, it was for Mark. He basically asked me, could I come in and work with the costume designer and come up with some of the drawings, because they liked the style of artwork. And that's also an interesting situation as well, because some ways you can overpower what it is that you're actually doing, because I don't know how many of you have seen costume drawings, costume design drawings. I don't know how many of you have done costume design drawings, but the thing about it is they're normally very loose, very quick. The costume designer knows exactly what they are, but nobody else does. And the thing was, my costume drawings were much more like comic strip art. They were very detailed and very precise. And of course, when the guys came over, they wanted the costume designer to draw like that, but the costume designer doesn't draw like that. Anyway, she did okay. She carried on with the job and did the job, which was great. But I felt very guilty for the fact that I'd drawn them a certain way and they would never be drawn that way again. But then, because I got so much work on the film, it didn't matter. It was like, yeah, do your stuff. This is a concept piece of artwork from Game of Thrones. I did 3 versions of this, which is Bran's fall from the tower. I did a bird's eye view very close to where he's at. I did a worm's eye view looking up at him. And I also did this one, which was from the battlements. And it was basically, let's look at this from interesting angles and see what makes sense to show on screen. I can't remember exactly what they showed on screen. Oh, they do show him.
The worm. They say
the worm's eye view?
They show the worm's view.
He's coming towards us. Yeah. Okay. I'm so glad you remember the show.
Of course I do.
It's lost in my memory now. My memory banks have shut down from this. Anyway, that's what this. So what I'm saying about this stuff is, again, it's being adaptable. You know, it's been capable of drawing all sorts of stuff and knowing when you're doing a concept and when you're doing a storyboard. If I was doing a storyboard version of this, it wouldn't be so detailed. I mean, it's just a different thing. You're trying to get information in there, though I do still draw in a detailed way. Anyway, okay, that's that, baby. And this was, again, one of the other things that I had to do was design weapons. One of the first jobs on Game of Thrones was design weapons. It was nothing to do with storyboarding. And so things like Ice and Needle and Longclaw and the Dothraki weapons and the Lannister weapons and the Stark weapons were all things that I had to design to character. So we had to understand what the nature of the characters were, how they existed, and so on. So things like knowing that the Stark weapons would be like the Stark nature, would be functional weaponry, very good weaponry, but very functional, nothing ornate whatsoever, meant that we designed the stuff that way. When it was the Lannister weapons, every single Lannister weapon had jewels in its hilt and so on. It was all stuff to deal with an affluent society. Dothraki weapons were things that were picked up along the way, so everything that you got was using your knowledge of every weapon that could ever come into existence on a movement through Asia all the way through to kind of France. Because that's the other thing about the Game of Thrones scenario, was that George's map of Westeros is basically built over the map of Europe. And it's kind of, Robert E. Howard did it all those years ago as well in the world of Conan. So the thing was, when you know that stuff, your mind starts, jumping into what you're meant to design. Things like the Dothraki stuff, lots of it came from India, lots of it came from Egypt, lots of it, it moved. And the weapons that they would have would be a mixture of all these things. Now, this is just a design side of things. I didn't know I could do this, except I stepped into it the way I stepped into a comic book. You just know that you can draw and you're going to do this stuff. And then you start the research bit. And the research bit is fantastic because you're getting into seeing the possibilities of stuff. And nothing is better than the reality. When you look at things that actually have existed, you're suddenly finding that you never knew this was the case. You didn't understand that. It's like, when I come over here and I get to, the guys take me out in these nice little archaeological jaunts, and I get to see stuff that in my mind I kind of knew existed in Greece, but I never knew it existed that way, and I am stunned by what I see. And I think that's one of the things as well, with being interested in any of this, I think you've got to be totally interested. I think you want to know everything about everything when it comes to doing a storyboard for whatever you're doing. You want to be in that world. You want to see what that world is going to be like. And it's something that is generated in your head way before you ever get to talk to a director about anything. It's like the interest level has got to be there. I worked on a science fiction thing recently, so it was all in the space station. And again, so much of that was fascinating once I started to look at what the interiors of a space station were actually like. It wasn't the way I'd imagined them. It certainly wasn't the way they were portrayed back when they did 2001, A Space Odyssey. Our world is very different. We don't have a lovely space station hovering up there that is like everybody's sitting around in suits and having a good old time. What we have is very cramped space. But this is the point about starting to understand these things. And it's like you know, the thing about any of this stuff, this sword warfare, you know, whenever the guys took me to the tomb of Philip of Macedonia, and I'm looking at this incredible armor, and I'm looking at all of this beautiful jewelry, and then I'm realizing, wait a minute, that's a very small person. That armor is actually going to fit somebody that's not very, very big. And then I'm thinking, oh my God, all these guys were small, very strong people. And you're kind of looking at it because the shield is giant size and the spear is giant size, but the armor's for a small guy. And or else it's a guy who wears very small armor because it looks great on his big thighs or something. I don't know. Anyway, the point is studying reality is one of the best ways of understanding what things look like, obviously. But knowing that stuff then influences what you draw. You know, I did a horror story. God, I did a horror story a bunch of years back. It looks like it's WAZ, the spelling, but it's W triangle Z, and it's a mathematical equation of some kind, I think. And the point was, though, so much of what I drew were car involvement storyboards, you know, things where the vehicle's going to crash and we're going to see all this stuff. I hate drawing cars. I absolutely detest drawing cars, but you know, I researched the damn things and I drew them and I understood what it was meant to look like. And they were meant to be American cars as well, which means the guys on the other side of the wheel. Oh, no, the way you guys drive. Okay, so the point was, I'm having to...
This will be edited.
I'm having to kind of fathom this out. And it is remarkable, you know, because it's that thing that you just automatically have to get into. You've got to get into the world that... you know, that you're drawing. You need to understand, and you need to be able to, in your mind, you need to be able to see the whole place. You need to understand where a corridor leads to and what room it's leading to, if you can. It's one of the great things as well, that you get to work from like overheads of sets, where it's just a drawing of a set, but you understand the positioning of where things are. Because you often don't know what the location or the set is going to look like. You have to imagine it. Sometimes you're lucky. Sometimes they give you photographs because they do know where the location's going to be. But it's like on Game of Thrones, there was a whole sequence that was filmed in Dubrovnik. I'd never seen Dubrovnik. I'd never been to Dubrovnik. I've been now, but I wasn't then. So when I got to draw it, I wasn't able to go out and look at it and see the angles that would make sense. And plus, I didn't have a director to talk to at that time. I was just given a set of photographs to work out a sequence. So I work out this sequence, which is the riot sequence with Joffrey, where they all start pelting him with dung, and he's trying to get away, and then Sansa runs down a corridor and gets attacked. And that whole sequence I had sat down and worked out with a couple of photographs. And this again is one of those rewarding moments as a storyboard artist when the director looks at the stuff and understands that it all works and says, this is great, we'll shoot it. And he did. So I basically had directed that little sequence, which was nice. I did that a couple of times on Game of Thrones, which is cool. Because I know what sequences they are, just as you will know which bits you've done. And there's one other little moment.
I allow it.
One other little moment? Yeah. Okay, there's one other little wonderful moment. And this again is where, as a storyboard artist, you've got to have guts to actually think about what the sequence is that you're drawing and know when there's something extra that can go in here. There's a little scene that I've talked about before where, right, have most of you seen Game of Thrones? Yes, okay. Do you remember the sequence where there's the funeral barge and it's pushed out into the lake and, what was his name? The guy, the nephew goes to shoot. Edmure, isn't it? Okay. Okay, so he goes to shoot the barge, to set it on fire, and he misses. So then he takes another arrow and he lights and he goes to shoot again, and he misses. And then his uncle, the blackfish, comes along, pushes him aside, and he shoots and sets the barge on fire. What the hell was it that he knew that Edmure didn't know? And that's what I kept asking myself, because I'd worked out the storyboards with David and Dan, and we were sitting down looking at this. And I kept looking at it when I went to draw it, thinking, what would he do? And then I thought, isn't it all about the wind and direction? So I thought, the blackfish is going to come out. He's going to look up at a flying pennant, knowing that the wind is going in a certain direction, which means he's going to shoot his arrow in a certain way. And so then he steps forward and shoots the arrow. When I told the guys, look, I've added in a couple of extra frames. And they said, okay. And they had a look and they went, this is brilliant. This is perfect. This works. And it did work. It made so much sense. So that little tiny moment, I think it's 2 shots. When you see those 2 shots in that sequence, you know why you thought of them. You know that you did them and you know that they accepted them. And that becomes something that you feel so kind of proud about, because it's one of the reasons why you're a storyboard artist. You're actually anticipating things and thinking things. It's not just about what you're being told. It's about what you also see. Because the thing is, what you're being told, that's fine. A flippin' performing monkey could do that. The point is, it's like, what else do you add? What else do you bring into that? And you have got to put yourself into that story. How would you direct it? If you're given those parameters where you're meant to show certain stuff, it's all about how would you direct it? Or maybe that's just my ego getting in the way, because it's how I would direct it, you know?
Of course.
Okay.
Of course. Let's move on to, we have like 10 minutes around, more or less, to move on to some.
I was just looking at it. I wanted to see what I had.
Are you admiring your work?
That's a good drawing. That's a
is a
nice
good drawing.
I like that
Drawing's a
drawing.
good man.
Okay, that was another concept piece. Any questions, folks?
Ερωτήσεις από το κοινό.
Oh, there's loads. Oh, what? Okay. There was one over there. There was one over there. There was one down there somewhere.
During your speech, you've mentioned the beheadings you designed in various films in the past. However, you hid from us, you've hidden, you didn't show us, the beheading of Ned Stark in the first season, yeah. But now you're bragging about those beheadings.
No, I'm telling you what I was asked to do. Bragging. Oh, if I was bragging, that would be different. I'd be dancing on top of this table. I'm not bragging.
Instead, you replaced it with a flock of pigeons flying away, but you didn't show us his head falling down.
No. Okay, let me explain. It is nothing to do with what I drew as to what we see on screen. And the point is that I drew what I was being asked to draw by the director for the beheading of Ned Stark. I drew it my way, but following all of the things that he had suggested, because there's a whole thing with Arya running through the crowd and so on. But it's important to not see everything. There's a load of, it's like horror movies. The best horror movies, you don't see what happens. You don't see the monster properly. You don't see what they do, because feeling what they do is much worse than seeing what they do. And the point is, if you want to have an emotional impact on an audience, it's a lot of the time it's what you don't see. And that's the same thing with the Ned Stark beheading. You know, do we really want to see a rubberized version of Ned's head falling off and rolling into a basket. No, we don't. We want to see the look on Ned's face where he is going to be beheaded. We want to see the sword coming down that's about to take his head off. We want to hear the crunch where he's taken the head off, and that's it. Why do we need to see it in the basket? We don't need to do the whole French guillotine thing. We get to see the birds fly off because, again, the birds are representative, I guess, of the soul. So it's like Ned Stark has died. We know he's died. The birds have taken flight. He's gone. But I can't remember exactly the storyboard that I drew because it's been a long time ago. I'd probably have to look at my book of storyboarding to know what I'd drawn. But seriously, a lot of the time it is not my job. It is, I follow the director's notes, except when I don't have director's notes and I get to do it myself. And then I make up stuff. Then I might have shown Ned Stark's head because I would have been like into the gore, but I didn't. So the point is, it is all about understanding the intent of a director, understanding the best way to tell that sequence of a scene. And it's always going to be different depending on the type of movie you're making and depending on the audience age as well that you're showing it to. Okay? Okay, what's next? Oh, Vangelis? Oh, yeah, sorry, I was going to say there's another one behind you as well as over here. Yeah. Hi. Sorry, what is my advice for people who are outside filmmaking and want to get inside filmmaking? Oh, okay, right. The greatest thing I think anybody can do is short movies, short films. You can make them in 2 days of actual filming. They don't cost a lot because now with the most amazing digital cameras in the world, we can do anything. And you're learning so much about what you're doing. And depending which job you do, like if you want a storyboard, you can storyboard a short film. It's not going to take a lot of time out of your life. It's a 10-minute thing usually. And also, pardon me, it's something where you can actually afford to do it for nothing. I don't advise we ever do anything for nothing, but sometimes you have to realize, well, you know, do I want to do this or not? And often it's a case of those first steps we make, we do out of enthusiasm rather than out of thinking, oh, but it's a job and I got to get paid for this. You know, if you lose the enthusiasm, I don't think any of us can actually do filmmaking because the point is there's a lot of technical parts of filmmaking that you think are something that's done mechanically with very little interest. In some movies it's like that. But I think the best people on the film set are the people who are enthusiastic about the production that they're making. And I mean enthusiastic where you don't care, you want to get to work and be there for the first moment of filmmaking. You want to enjoy that whole process. Rightly so, you should be paid for it, but sometimes we know that the parameters of making a short film are that there's no money. I've done some short films and I've always made sure to pay the people in front of the camera because sometimes it's been my friends that have helped me make the short film. That's okay because we're friends and we're still friends, and the thing is it's only for a short moment of our time, and most of us are working on something else, so we don't mind that. But for me, the people that are in front of the camera, they're the ones that are going to make or break your film. You know, because all you guys behind the camera know exactly what you're doing, but those in front of the camera, we need good people. And the better people you can get, the better the piece is going to be, hopefully. Anyway, yeah, have you done your training then in film school or anything? You're starting film school. I think by the time, I think constantly be making things, do you know what role you wish to do in filmmaking? Do you want to produce, do you want to direct, do you want to, do one of the other departments? You want to direct, right. Well, it's also really interesting the way people come into directing, because you'll find that there's a bunch of storyboard artists that have become directors, And thus the way they make a movie is probably different from the bunch of costume designers that become directors, or the bunch of actors that become directors. Because a lot of the time the actors becoming directors, they're looking at it from a whole different route. They're more interested in what the actors are going to do, and sometimes less involved in what it's going to look like around about, and that's why they rely on cameramen and so on to make up certain decisions. But there's an awful lot of cooperation to make a thing happen. There's a lot of understanding where it's your point of view and where it needs to be somebody else's. So I would still suggest, no matter which stage you get into of learning, I think you should make short films, all sorts of short films, everything. You know, anything that you can actually make happen, make it happen, and look for great backdrops. You know, give yourself something interesting to be on screen as well, you know. It's just as easy to put people talking in front of a great backdrop as it is to have people talking inside a rubbish-looking room that, you know, is going to have nothing for you on screen. Look for things. I mean, it's a visual medium. It's something that's beautiful to look at, even when it's meant to be serious and cold and austere or what have you. But it's how you design austere. You know, what shadows do you put into place? What is it you're going to play with? Anyway, that's kind of, I'd say make short films. What's next?
Hello.
Hi. Sorry, can you, Evangelos? Artificial intelligence? Oh, shit, man. So, oh, sorry. You're replacing me. That's it. Oh, here we go. Oh, my God. Oh, here we go. Well, you know, I have to say, I guess if you feed all the knowledge in the world into an AI, and the AI is able to come up with every kind of scenario that's possible, they may generate a really good movie. I don't know. I mean, what can I say about artificial intelligence? I've seen Blade Runner. I know what happens in the future. I've seen Terminator. We're all going to die. That'll be it. It's going to be artificial intelligence takes over. I have no job. Everybody's dead. That's it.
We have time for one more question.
There was a guy over here that had asked something, yeah? Or was going to ask something. Hi. Make it a good one. Oh.
If he or she actually held those drawings for instance, and also how would you advise an aspiring artist to reach and try to train for those things?
Okay. I think I've covered a lot of that earlier on, but the point is I'll just do this again because I'm probably the wrong person to ask what I would look for in another artist to do a piece of work. I kind of know what I have to look for in myself. So if I was thinking of hiring myself to do a piece of work, I'd want to know, could I draw things that actually looked human? Because I imagine that I'd probably have to deal with humans somewhere in it. Could I be diverse? Could I jump between things on the basis of generating a world on paper that is meant to unify and look correct? Which means, am I skilled enough to be able to do this? Am I capable of being able to draw anything that's thrown at me from any angle? You know, can I see things from above? Can I see things from below? Can I restrict myself to only seeing things from a camera level that is actually quite human? I did a job one time that I'd forgotten about, which all the storyboards had to be seen basically from any height that a human being would be at, given the situation. So they could see things up there because they can look up there. They could be seen from up there because, again, you'd be with another human. They didn't want me to do low angle shots unless somebody fell in the ground. Don't do low angle shots. I mean, I love low angle shots. I love playing around with different aspects of shots. But I realize, and I know much more now, that a lot of the things that we accept and that the public accepts is when they see things that are from a human level. Because the minute it's not at a human level, sometimes people just don't understand it. You know, artists do most of the time because we can look at things from all sorts of angles. So having that ability to see stuff from all sorts of angles is really useful because you know when not to use it. You know, I can do all this stuff, but I'm not going to do it now because it doesn't require that. But you also need to be good at storytelling. You know, storytelling is a massive part of doing this. Now, I got to say, you can make a storyboard from photographs. You know, you can go out there with a camera and you can go to locations and you can shoot with a camera and create your storyboards that way. You can get your friends to or actors or stunt people or whatever to be in the positions of where you're going to have your actors. So you can do it with a camera. You can, and of course, you can do it with moving video as well. So you can actually emulate what you're going to shoot. You can do that. Usually there's more people involved in that one, so the expense has just gone up. Again, if you can sit and draw it first, and you can draw it convincingly, so that everybody that looks at it can understand exactly what they're seeing. They can see that a person has moved from here to there, and your camera has gone round them, and now you're looking back at this person. You know, if we can draw that, it doesn't take us a lot of time to draw it, but you have saved lots of money, and you've opened up the eyes of whoever's looking at it. So I think you've got to be clear in what you do. You've got to be able to draw. And there's kind of degrees of that, obviously. I mean, some people are better drawers than other people, but some people are better storytellers than other people. It just depends. And but I would constantly practice the drawing side of things. Oh, it's switched off. That's good. I don't have to show anymore. I think you should always be trying to do better at your artwork, always practicing, but always telling stories and trying to think of what interesting shots can go into telling this story. Okay? Better at everything. And, you know, the first thing that you see is, can the person draw? I mean, that is the first thing. It's like I said, the story that I got, where I got onto the bus, and I'm doing little scribbles, and the director goes, you know, oh my gosh, you're very fast. And then the next day he says, you really can draw. Those two things were qualities that I needed to be the storyboard artist. I needed to be fast, and I needed to draw. So there's two things anyway. You take those with you and draw fast and do it well. Okay? Excellent. Wonderful.
Thank you very much. It was amazing.
Thank you. I'm sure there's a million things that I haven't covered, and we could do lots more of this. But thanks, folks. Oh, we would.